In the wild corners of the world, from the icy Arctic to dense mountain forests, humans face sudden, brutal attacks by powerful bears. These encounters can turn a peaceful trip into a fight for life, with tour buses overturned, hikers mauled, fishermen crushed, and campers dragged. Hunger, surprise, and lost fear fuel these deadly interactions. In this video, we'll explore 6 harrowing stories that reveal the chilling realities of bear attacks on humans, showcasing the unpredictable nature of these magnificent creatures and the consequences of human-wildlife encounters. The bus creaked as it rolled to a slow stop along the narrow dirt road near the river in the heart of a remote region. Towering trees lined the steep ravine to the right, and to the left ran a shallow salmon stream, its waters glinting pink with spawning fish. The driver, a 52-year-old former military mechanic turned tour operator, had agreed to pause briefly. 16 passengers pressed their faces to the windows, eager to photograph the river and the wild beauty that surrounded them. Natalia Guseva, a 27-year-old traveler, sat near the middle, arms still sore from a recent mountaineering trip. She remained quiet and observant, more cautious than most of the others, many of whom were retirees from a nearby city. The group laughed and focused their cameras toward the water. A retired biology teacher leaned out of his window, intent on capturing an image of the salmon. No one noticed the shifting trees on the far bank or the low huff of breath that preceded the chaos. Without warning, a massive shape burst from the thicket. A large bear, likely weighing over 700 kilograms, lunged out of the brush and barreled across the stream, sending water spraying into the air. It did not hesitate. With a roar that shattered the stillness of the forest, it smashed into the side of the parked vehicle with its shoulder, the metal groaning beneath its weight. The glass nearest the impact shattered inward. The driver, startled by the thunderous blow, panicked. His foot hit the accelerator, but his hand jerked the wheel too far to the right. The rear wheels slipped in the loose dirt, the bus tilted, and gravity took over. The vehicle teetered for a heartbeat on the edge of the ravine, then tipped. The sound that followed was sickening. A screech of metal and the low grinding thump of earth and steel colliding as the bus plunged downward. Trees splintered as it rolled end over end. Windows exploded. Luggage shot into the air like confetti. Passengers were flung about like dolls. Above the carnage, the bear stood at the edge, chest heaving, watching the bus vanish. Inside the tumbling wreck, the mountaineer's seatbelt held during the first rotation. Then the buckle snapped. She slammed into the seat ahead, the ceiling, and the wall. A high, brief scream was heard, then quickly swallowed by the crash. A tree trunk pierced the side wall, impaling the center aisle. The rear end of the bus tore open, and 2 passengers were ejected into the forest below. When the bus finally came to rest, it lay twisted and smoking against a cluster of birch and pine. The scent of oil and blood hung thick in the air. The mountaineer regained consciousness in a heap of limbs and debris. Her head throbbed, and blood ran down her face from a gash in her scalp. She pulled herself upright, coughing from the dust. Around her, no one screamed anymore, only the soft hiss of a leaking radiator and the distant caw of birds unsettled by the chaos. Nearby, the retired teacher slumped forward, unmoving. A woman had been crushed beneath the collapsed roof. There were too many bodies. She couldn't find enough air to scream. Panic surged, but instinct took over. She crawled toward a broken window and shoved herself through, slicing her arm on jagged glass. The slope above looked impossibly steep. The bear had vanished, but the fear clung to her, oppressive, unrelenting. She climbed. Each step was a war against pain and exhaustion. Her shoes were shredded, clothes soaked with blood and sweat. Thorns tore her sleeves. The heat of the June sun pressed down, but she kept moving. She didn't know how far the road was, only that she couldn't stop. Stopping meant the bear might return. Stopping meant no one would know what had happened. Nearly 2 hours passed before she reached the roadside and flagged down a supply truck driven by a local farmer. Shocked, the man radioed for help immediately. Emergency responders arrived in waves. First a fire crew, then paramedics, and eventually a forestry team trained for search and rescue in rugged terrain. The scene they discovered was worse than anticipated. 10 passengers had died either on impact or from severe injuries sustained moments later. 3 more were critically injured. Only 3 survivors were stable enough to speak by nightfall. The mountaineer was one of them. Authorities reconstructed the event using tire marks, survivor accounts, and the shattered remains of the bus. It appeared the bear had been feeding at the stream when the bus's presence startled it. With illegal hunting increasing in the region, many large animals had become hyper-defensive and extremely territorial. Starvation and the scent of food from the vehicle may have provoked the charge. The point of impact matched the dimensions of a bear's shoulder. Deep claw marks were embedded in the metal. Many doubted a bear could flip such a large vehicle until they saw the wreckage. Helicopters airlifted the deceased from the ravine the following day. The survivors received treatment in a hospital in the nearby city. The mountaineer declined interviews for a week. When she finally spoke, her recollection was clear but emotionally withdrawn. Though the memory of the crash lingered, it was the eerie stillness afterward, the silence following the screams, that left the deepest impression. In response, officials introduced stricter tourism regulations. Stopping near known wildlife feeding zones was banned. Tour operators were required to undergo wildlife safety certification, and protective fencing was approved along hazardous routes. Despite these changes, the events of that day could not be undone. Above the ravine, the salmon stream still flowed, glinting in the summer sun. Somewhere in the dense trees beyond, the bear still roamed, a shadow among shadows. A reminder that nature does not forgive complacency. The narrow forest road twisted through the hardwood canopy like a serpent, its cracked asphalt littered with fallen branches and patches of gravel. It was just after 6:30 p.m. on June 10th, and the fading sunlight filtered through the trees, painting streaks of gold across the windshield of a mid-sized crossover. The driver, a 34-year-old software developer from Harrisburg named Ethan Webb, had chosen the scenic route back from a remote cabin retreat. He was alone, half-focused on the long drive ahead, while a quiet podcast murmured through the speakers. The woods were dense and silent, miles from the nearest town, with no cell signal and almost no traffic. The isolation never bothered him. In fact, he welcomed it. He found peace in the quiet and stillness, but that peace was shattered in an instant. A dark shape bolted from the left side of the road, a fully grown black bear, swift and low, its limbs a blur of motion and fear. Ethan reacted on instinct, yanking the wheel hard to the right. The tires screamed across the pavement. Then came a metal-on-wood crunch as the vehicle veered off the edge of the road and slammed into a tree. The front end crumpled with devastating force. Airbags exploded from the dashboard, flooding the cabin with acrid dust. Disoriented and aching, Ethan groaned and blinked through the haze. The engine clicked under the buckled hood as smoke began to rise from the front grille. His chest ached where the seatbelt had snapped tight, and blood trickled from a shallow gash above his right eyebrow. But he was conscious, alive. Dazed, he forced the door open and stumbled out into the humid evening. The forest felt suddenly claustrophobic, the trees pressing in on both sides. Ethan moved toward the front of the car, limping slightly, trying to make sense of the damage. The bumper was mangled, the headlights destroyed, and fluid hissed from underneath onto the forest floor. Just beyond the ditch, behind a tangle of ferns, something shifted. He froze. There, just beyond the tree line, stood the same black bear. It was closer than before, much closer. Its posture was low and uneven. One front leg dragged unnaturally. Its mouth hung open, tongue exposed, and a dark smear of blood leaked from its right flank. It was no longer fleeing. There was no time to react, no time to run, shout, or retreat. The bear lunged. In 2 bounds, it crossed the ditch with startling speed. A guttural grunt escaped it as it slammed into Ethan's chest, knocking him to the ground. The back of his head hit the earth hard, the breath torn from his lungs in a single exhale. Massive paws pinned his shoulders. Then came the teeth, yellow, wet, and fast. Claws tore through fabric and skin. Blood sprayed as the bear shredded through his torso. He thrashed beneath it, legs kicking, arms flailing, but the bear's weight was insurmountable. His cries rang through the trees, brief, sharp, and filled with panic. A pickup truck appeared moments later, its silver frame catching the last streaks of sunlight as it rounded the bend. Behind the wheel, a retired lineman named Harvey Bell saw the wrecked vehicle first. Then the shape of the bear crouched over something in the road. In the passenger seat, his wife gripped the dashboard in silence. Harvey leaned on the horn. The sound pierced the forest, echoing off the trees, but the bear remained fixed. He rolled down the window and shouted, voice raw and urgent. The bear looked up, its face smeared red, and then lowered its head again, clamping its jaws into the victim's side. The body convulsed once, then went still. Acting without a plan, Harvey grabbed a water bottle and hurled it out the window. It bounced off the bear's back. At last, the animal paused, snorted, and then turned, limping as it slipped back into the forest, trailing blood and moving with a stiff, erratic gait. They leapt from the truck and rushed to the man on the ground. The damage was beyond anything either had seen. His torso was torn open, a leg was mutilated, and his skin had gone pale beneath the blood. Marla, trembling, knelt to check for a pulse, though she already understood the truth. By the time emergency responders arrived 20 minutes later, Ethan Webb was dead. The scene baffled wildlife officers. Fatal bear attacks in the region were nearly non-existent. Black bears, known to be shy and reclusive, rarely engaged with humans. Yet this one had pursued, attacked, and killed, breaking all expectations. Forensics and veterinary assessments later revealed that the bear had suffered significant injuries, possibly struck by Ethan's vehicle as it crossed the road, or already hurt prior to the collision. Either way, the bear had been disoriented, bleeding, and likely frightened. Wildlife officials surmised that when Ethan exited his vehicle and approached the roadside, the wounded animal reacted out of instinct, perceiving a threat where there was none. That split-second interaction sealed the outcome. The bitter irony weighed heavily on those who investigated. Ethan had swerved to spare the bear's life. That act of compassion ultimately put him in the path of the very animal he meant to avoid harming. Whether he stepped out to inspect the damage, look for help, or simply regain his bearings, he found himself within reach of a creature in pain. His family was informed that night. His father, a former state trooper, called the event a freak occurrence, a brutal case of timing and circumstance. Others speculated more broadly, pointing to deteriorating forest conditions, increased traffic, and habitat fragmentation as compounding pressures on wildlife. What once was safe wilderness now held danger in plain sight. Harvey Bell later offered a brief, solemn statement. Neither he nor Marla could shake the memory of Ethan's final moments, his eyes wide, frightened, and confused. They asked themselves if there was something more they could have done. The silence that followed that question offered no answer. 1 week later, state officials tracked the injured bear to a nearby ravine. It was euthanized humanely. Necropsy results confirmed internal injuries consistent with vehicular trauma, fractured ribs and torn muscle, likely inflicted during the collision. No fault was formally assigned. The animal, they said, acted as any might under duress and fear. In a quiet warning to the public, authorities issued a new advisory. If you strike wildlife, do not exit your vehicle, call for help. Remain inside. Wait for trained responders. Back on that winding forest road, the cracks in the asphalt were still lined with shards of glass, smeared oil, and old blood. The silence had returned, but it no longer brought peace, only grief. The air hung thick with the damp scent of salmon and seaweed, the soft hum of late June twilight settling over the remote fishing lodge on Kodiak Island. Elena Morozova, 58, had spent the day in the lodge's kitchen, a sturdy wooden building perched near the shoreline, bustling with fishermen and guides unloading their catch. A seasoned camp cook with decades of experience, Elena was known for her quiet strength and steady hands. The kitchen was her domain. But that evening, one final task remained: dispose of the grease water from the day's cooking. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the camp's narrow paths. Carrying a heavy bucket filled with foul-smelling water, Elena stepped outside toward the designated dumping area behind the kitchen. The air was cool, but moisture clung to her jacket. She moved quickly, aware of the risks. Kodiak bears roamed freely here, drawn by the potent smells of fish and cooking residue. Protocols were strict. No one was supposed to be alone after dark. But the bear had arrived before her. A mature male Kodiak bear, easily over 1,000 pounds, stood just inside the tree line, his massive form camouflaged in the darkening woods. He had followed the scent of food, slipping silently into the edge of camp. His broad head dipped low as he sniffed the air, muscles tight, eyes glinting with focus. He was patient. He was close. Elena rounded the corner near the dumpsters. Her boot struck a loose stone. It skittered across the gravel. The bear's head snapped up. Their eyes met. A beat of silence passed. Shock, recognition, fear, before instinct exploded into motion. The bear reared onto its hind legs and charged. The first strike came fast and violent, a swipe of enormous claws across Elena's right shoulder and neck. The blow knocked her backward, sending the bucket flying. Greasy water splashed onto the earth. Pain surged through her body. Blood spilled from deep lacerations. The bear's jaws snapped inches from her face, teeth bared, breath hot and wet. Its weight bore down like a landslide. Elena screamed, a high, piercing cry that shattered the evening stillness and jolted the camp into chaos. Inside the main lodge, two fishing guides, Yuri and Mikhail, reacted instantly. They grabbed bear spray and flare guns from a wall rack and bolted outside. The camp was small. Elena's screams echoed clearly across the clearing. As they approached the kitchen, the scene sharpened through the dim light. The bear was crouched low, still over Elena, focused and unmoving. Yuri fired a flare into the air. The sudden burst of light and sound startled the animal. Mikhail unleashed a stream of bear spray, the chemical cloud catching the bear full in the face. The bear reared back, coughing and shaking its massive head. Then, with a heavy grunt, it turned and lumbered away into the woods, leaving a trail of blood in its wake. Yuri and Mikhail rushed to Elena's side. She was conscious but fading, her breaths ragged, her body limp. Blood soaked her clothes, mixing with dirt and grease. Her right arm hung unnaturally. Each breath drew a sharp hiss of pain. The guides did what they could with what they had. Clean cloths, torn from their shirts, were pressed against her wounds. A radio call was made for medevac. A helicopter was dispatched from the town of Kodiak, though it would take precious time to arrive. The attack had lasted only moments, but the damage was catastrophic. Elena's collarbone was shattered. Multiple ribs on her right side were fractured. Claw marks had torn deep into muscle and tissue. She fought to stay awake, pain clouding her thoughts. But deeper still was fear. Not of the bear, but of how close death had come without warning. Surgeons worked for hours once she reached the hospital. Her recovery would be slow and grueling, but she survived, thanks to the quick response of the guides and the medics. Wildlife officers arrived at the lodge to investigate. Their report confirmed what many had feared. The attack had not been predatory. It was defensive. The bear had been startled, drawn in by scent, triggered by noise, and confronted suddenly in a low-visibility moment. In its eyes, the encounter was a threat. Defensive attacks are often the most violent. Unlike predatory incidents, which involve stalking and deliberate engagement, defensive responses are reactive, fueled by fear, instinct, and confusion. The bear lashed out because it felt cornered. The event served as a chilling reminder of the realities of living in bear country. No amount of experience, caution, or familiarity with the land could fully erase the risks of working near apex predators. In wild places, even routine tasks can become dangerous in an instant. The lodge responded swiftly. New safety protocols were implemented. No one outside alone after dusk, stricter food waste disposal systems, mandatory bear spray on all staff, and more frequent drills for emergency response. Caution became rule, not suggestion. Elena's spirit, however, remained unbroken. From her hospital bed, she vowed to return to the island, not out of defiance, but out of respect. She understood the wilderness and its rhythms. She had lived long enough among it to know that wild creatures do not act out of malice, only instinct. Her body would carry the scars for the rest of her life. But her voice would carry something more, a warning and a lesson. Respect the land. Respect the animals. And never forget that the line between safety and survival is as thin as the path through the woods at dusk. Somewhere in those same dense woods behind the camp, the bear still roamed. Towering, silent, ancient. Not a villain, not a monster, just a force of nature shaped by hunger, fear, and solitude. The forest around Kodiak whispered its secrets, and for those who lived inside it, survival meant understanding one truth above all. You are always a visitor here. The northern winter sky hung low, a pale, frozen dome heavy with snow-laden clouds. Alex Hammond, a seasoned trapper in his mid-40s, had spent decades navigating the unforgiving wilderness of Canada's Arctic Circle. He knew this land intimately, every ridge, every frozen creek, every shifting shelf of ice etched into his mind like an old map. But this day was unlike any other. The cold had come sharper than usual, and the ice, once solid, trustworthy, had grown treacherously thin. Climate change was creeping silently across the tundra, unraveling the rhythms that generations of hunters had relied on. Alex was crossing the frozen expanse of Lake Athabasca on foot. His snowshoes crunched softly over the brittle surface. Traps baited for foxes and hares were spread across the lake, each step measured and cautious. The ice groaned beneath him, a low, ominous warning. Then, without warning, the ice gave way. A sharp crack shattered the stillness, and in an instant, the world inverted. Cold, black water swallowed him whole. He plunged through, the shock like a lightning strike across his nerves. His limbs flailed, scrabbling for purchase on the slick ice as the freezing water clamped down with paralyzing force. It wasn't just cold. It was alive, suffocating, pulling him under. Alex screamed, a sound ripped from somewhere deep, where fear becomes survival. Above him, the ice shuddered beneath a heavy shape. A polar bear, gaunt, desperate, its ribs showing beneath a yellowed coat, had been nearby, drawn by the sound, the scent of fresh water, the hope of food. With seals and fish vanishing from shrinking ice floes, the bear had become a creature of hunger, pushed far beyond its normal territory. It saw Alex. It charged. The ice cracked further beneath its weight, but still it came, driven not by aggression, but by the cold fire of starvation. Alex, gasping, managed to claw his way onto a sliver of intact ice, slick and treacherous. He slid, but held. Just long enough to see the bear's massive form bear down on him. It lunged. The impact knocked him back into the water. Alex surfaced again, thrashing, fighting for life. The bear struck. Its teeth found his left arm, and with one savage bite, crushed muscle and bone through his thick jacket. He screamed again, this time a cry of pain so raw it echoed across the tundra. Paws the size of dinner plates slammed into his chest and shoulders. His body was battered, broken. Blood spilled into the icy water, blooming crimson beneath the fractured surface. On shore, 3 hunters heard his cries. They were camped for the night, their tents nestled among the sparse trees. When the screams reached them, they grabbed rifles and sprinted toward the lake, hearts pounding, boots churning snow. They arrived to a nightmare. The polar bear loomed over Alex on the ice, a savage silhouette against the stark white. It was biting, mauling, killing. The hunters shouted, fired warning shots into the air. The bear flinched, growled, and released its grip. It turned, loping away with heavy, reluctant steps, vanishing into the dim tree line, a ghost retreating into the snow. Alex lay still. The hunters raced to him, pulling his limp body from the broken ice. He was shivering violently, skin mottled with frostbite, his breaths shallow and fading. They wrapped him in emergency blankets, trying to staunch the bleeding from his mauled arm. Radio calls crackled into the frozen air, summoning a medevac from the nearest base. But time was against them. Hypothermia had already taken hold. His core temperature plummeted, his heartbeat slowed. His lips turned blue, his eyelids fluttered. By the time the helicopter arrived, an hour later, Alex Hammond was gone. His death sent ripples through the northern communities that had long depended on the land's balance. Trapping was a way of life, a tradition rooted in resilience, passed down through families. And Alex had embodied it. Quiet, skillful, cautious to a fault. But this winter, the land had changed. Wildlife officials investigated the scene. Their findings were sobering but clear. The bear's attack was not territorial or predatory. It was desperate. The animal had risked fragile ice and proximity to humans because it had no other choice. Climate change had cracked the ecosystem as surely as it had the lake's surface. Warming temperatures had driven prey farther out, broken hunting routes, and pushed apex predators like the polar bear into fatal proximity with humans. The rules were shifting. Survival was no longer a matter of experience alone. It was a gamble against a changing world. Alex Hammond had respected that world. He had lived within it, never above it. And even he, with all his wisdom, had not been safe. His loss was more than tragedy. It was a warning. On the wind-scoured ice of Lake Athabasca, the bear still roamed, thinner, hungrier, and ever closer to the edge. A symbol of a wild kingdom melting beneath the feet of those who had once called it home. The early morning fog clung low over the cold, gray waters off the rugged northern coastline, wrapping the small fishing village in a thick, damp shroud. The harbor, usually alive with the clamor of voices and seagull cries, was muted by the dense mist. Mark Turner, age 42, a lifelong fisherman known in the village for his quiet determination and steady hands, stood alone at the dock, unloading the morning's haul. The briny scent of fresh salmon filled the air, mixing with the sharp bite of sea breeze and the familiar sting of diesel fuel. His skiff, a modest vessel with fading paint and worn wooden railings, rocked gently beside him, a loyal partner aged by countless seasons at sea. Mark moved with practiced precision, the repetitive rhythm of unloading catch after catch, something that kept him grounded. His muscles ached from the dawn haul, but it was the kind of pain he knew well, a reminder of a life lived close to nature. Neatly stacked crates of glistening pink fish grew at his feet, their scales catching faint glimmers of light. He found peace in the solitude and the honest labor, even as the fog thickened around him. But that stillness soon masked something far more dangerous than bad weather. From the wall of mist, an immense shape began to form, its outline slow, lumbering, and deliberate. A full-grown male bear, likely Grizzly in nature and drawn by the powerful scent of fresh fish, stepped out onto the slick rocks near the dock. It moved with a deliberate gait, each heavy paw pressing into wet wood with a creaking sound that broke the still air. The creature's head remained low, its shoulders hunched, eyes locked on the source of the scent. It had no fear. Mark stood frozen. He had heard stories of wildlife drawn too close to town, but rarely had anyone seen a bear this bold, this close, and certainly not in the harbor itself. This one moved with intent, not the curious hesitation of a wild animal exploring unknown space, but the directness of a predator that had crossed a line. In an instant, the bear surged forward. It launched itself onto the boat, and the skiff groaned under the sudden weight. Water surged over the sides. The structure rocked violently, nearly tipping, as the massive animal landed on the deck with a thunderous crash. Mark stumbled back, heart hammering, his breath caught in his throat. There was no space to move, no direction in which to run. The bear lunged, its jaws snapping shut on Mark's left arm. The crushing pressure of bone and muscle giving way was immediate and overwhelming. He screamed, pain radiating through his chest as the creature dragged him across the boat's narrow deck. The world became a blur of searing pain, blood spraying across the boards as the bear thrashed him against the hull, ribs fractured under the repeated impacts. Breath left his lungs. Cold water splashed against his boots as the skiff nearly capsized from the violence. Claws raked across his chest, tearing fabric and skin with terrifying ease. The thick coat he wore offered little protection. He tried to shove the beast away, to resist, but his strength was vanishing rapidly. The bear, a desperate force driven by instinct, was unstoppable in that moment. From the shoreline, several fishermen had witnessed the terrifying encounter. The surreal image of a wild animal aboard a fishing vessel jolted them into action. They reacted immediately, grabbing hunting rifles from nearby sheds. Shouts echoed across the harbor. The sharp crack of warning shots broke through the fog like thunder. The sound startled the bear, its ears flicking back, nostrils flaring. With a final growl, the bear released its grip and sprang from the boat, landing heavily on the dock before vanishing into the trees that bordered the village. It disappeared quickly, the thick mist swallowing it whole. Silence fell again, unnatural, heavy, and ominous. Mark collapsed onto the deck, his clothing soaked in blood. His breathing came in shallow bursts, and his injuries were catastrophic. His arm was torn and unrecognizable. His ribs were shattered. A deep gash across his torso bled freely. He reached weakly toward the boat's radio, fingers trembling, but consciousness began to slip away. By then, his fellow fishermen had already launched into motion. They reached the boat within moments, wrapping Mark in wool blankets and attempting to staunch the bleeding. Calls for emergency evacuation were shouted into radios. A helicopter arrived swiftly, its rotors whipping the fog into spirals as it descended over the harbor. Paramedics moved with urgent precision, administering oxygen, securing tourniquets, and racing to stabilize his condition. But the damage was too great. The list of injuries was devastating. Punctured lungs, extreme blood loss, massive internal trauma. Despite the team's best efforts, Mark passed away during flight, surrounded by the roar of the engine and the clipped voices of the medical crew. The heart monitor's beeping slowed until it fell silent. The ocean, which had given so much to Mark's life, now bore witness to its end. News of the incident swept through the village like a tidal wave. People were stunned. In a place where residents had learned to live alongside risk, from storms and ice, from sea and solitude, this was something different. A bear boarding a boat was a violation of an unspoken boundary. It signaled a change few were ready to confront. Wildlife officials investigated quickly. What they found was grim but not entirely unexpected. The bear, they explained, had likely been pushed to the edge by changing environmental conditions. Shifting climate patterns, a decline in available food sources, and pressures from human development had made encounters like this more likely. The bear's intrusion wasn't senseless aggression. It was survival behavior in a world becoming harder for wildlife to navigate. Mark's death became more than a tragedy. It became a symbol. It showed how the lines between wild and human domains were blurring. His boat, once a symbol of life and livelihood, had turned into a place of vulnerability. In the weeks that followed, the community changed. Waste disposal systems were overhauled to reduce wildlife attraction. New protocols for harbor security were introduced. Armed patrols became standard during low-visibility mornings. Still, the damage had been done. The village's sense of safety, its shared understanding of risk, was fundamentally shaken. They remembered Mark as a man of quiet resilience. He was a steady presence on the docks, someone who respected the sea and took only what it offered. Stories of his work, his humor, and his dedication spread from dock to dinner table, a legacy shaped by the very waters that had defined his life. And somewhere in the shadows of the forested coast, the bear still moved, driven by hunger, by ancient instincts, and by a landscape growing smaller and more unpredictable with every passing season. The night was quiet and still in the shadowed valleys of the Italian Alps near Trentino. Stars twinkled faintly above the towering peaks, their jagged silhouettes cutting sharply against the dark sky. Two college students, Luca and Matteo, had pitched their small tent near a wooded ridge, eager to escape the noise of city life and embrace the rugged mountain wilderness. Both were in their early 20s, youthful, energetic, and enthusiastic, but inexperienced when it came to the harsh realities of alpine wildlife. Their gear was new and carefully selected, and their spirits were high after a long day hiking through fragrant pine forests and wading in crystal-clear streams. The friends had spent months planning this trip. They wanted a complete break from their studies and the constant grind of urban living. They hiked for hours, carrying everything they thought they might need: dehydrated meals, fresh water, compact cookware, and a lightweight camping kit. Their confidence in their preparations was high, yet neither fully grasped the dangers that could arise from something as simple as improperly stored food. By the time night deepened and the clock passed 3 in the morning, a cold silence had settled over the landscape. The students were deep in sleep, unaware that danger was slowly closing in. Outside the thin nylon barrier of their tent, a faint rustling disturbed the stillness. A large form moved carefully near the perimeter of the camp, an adult male brown bear, its thick coat blending into the darkness, its powerful limbs moving with silent precision. Its nose twitched, catching the scent of food that lingered in the air, left behind by careless visitors over recent weeks. Despite repeated advisories from local wilderness authorities about the importance of securing food and disposing of trash correctly, the bear had developed a dangerous familiarity with human campsites. It had learned to associate them with food. Easy food. Over time, its natural fear of people had diminished. Now, driven by hunger and a sense of learned opportunity, the bear was bold enough to investigate once again. The bear crept forward, its enormous paws gliding across the soft forest floor. The only sound it made was the faint scratch of claws against the outer wall of the tent, a sound just sharp enough to stir Luca from sleep. His eyes fluttered open, confused by the unfamiliar noise. At first, he assumed it might be wind rustling the tent, or a small animal brushing past. But then, everything changed in a sudden, violent instant. The tent tore open as the bear lashed out with brute force. The fragile structure collapsed immediately. The two students were thrown into chaos, the sudden destruction transforming their temporary shelter into a death trap. Matteo tried to scramble upright, panic overtaking him. But the bear lunged. It clamped down on his leg with a crushing bite, dragging him out of the torn fabric as pain ripped through his body. His cries of agony filled the night air. Luca, frozen in shock for a heartbeat too long, suddenly found himself bolting through the torn tent, fleeing blindly into the woods. His heart pounded as he stumbled in the darkness, but his attempt to escape drew the bear's attention away from Matteo. With a deep growl, the animal released its grip and turned toward Luca, now the closer and more mobile target. In a flash, the bear lunged again, catching Luca's foot in its jaws. He was pulled backward, the earth scraping beneath him. But Luca was wearing his heavy-duty hiking boots, even while sleeping, a personal habit formed over previous camping trips. The thick leather and rigid soles absorbed most of the pressure, protecting his foot from severe injury. The boot held, resisting the crushing force, buying Luca just enough time. The bear pulled hard, dragging Luca across the uneven ground. Dirt and twigs tore at his clothing and skin, but the boot wouldn't budge. Desperation surged through him as he kicked and flailed, trying to resist the animal's strength. Every second the boot held gave him a chance at survival, though the fear and pain were overwhelming. Elsewhere in the woods, other campers were abruptly awakened by the noise, shouts, crashing, and an unnatural cry that shattered the stillness. Responding with urgency and fear, they burst from their tents, grabbing whatever was nearby to make noise. They banged metal pots together, slammed pans with sticks, and shouted into the night with all the force they could muster. The racket echoed across the forest, creating a disorienting chorus meant to scare the animal away. Startled by the sudden surge of noise and movement, the bear paused. It growled in frustration, shifting its weight and glancing around as if trying to gauge whether the risk outweighed the reward. For a tense few moments it hovered over Luca, breathing heavily. Then, as if making a decision, it growled one final time and released him, retreating slowly back into the shadows from where it had come. Luca stumbled to his feet, disoriented and trembling. He ran back to Matteo, who lay in the dirt with his leg badly mangled. Blood soaked the ground beneath him, and the wounds revealed bone and torn flesh. Without hesitation, Luca tore strips from his own shirt, using them to apply pressure and slow the bleeding. He whispered calming words, struggling to keep Matteo awake, refusing to let fear take full control. Emergency responders arrived quickly, alerted by calls from the other campers. Both students were airlifted to the nearest hospital, where Matteo underwent multiple surgeries to address his severe injuries. He faced months of rehabilitation. Luca, though physically less harmed, carried the psychological weight of the event. He suffered minor wounds, but the trauma was far more than skin deep. An investigation began immediately. Wildlife experts concluded the bear had become habituated, a term used to describe wild animals that lose their natural fear of humans due to repeated exposure and food-based conditioning. Over time, the bear had developed aggressive behaviors and began to view campsites as reliable food sources. To prevent future incidents, officials tracked the bear using humane traps and monitoring tools. After several days, the animal was captured and safely relocated to a remote wilderness far from areas of human activity. Conservationists used the event as a renewed call for responsible outdoor behavior, highlighting how critical it is to respect wildlife boundaries and follow proper safety protocols. Luca and Matteo's experience soon became a widely circulated cautionary tale. In the stunning but unpredictable alpine wilderness, one lapse in judgment had nearly led to tragedy. What began as a joyful escape into nature transformed into a sobering reminder that respect and vigilance are essential in the outdoors. Their story would serve as a lesson for others venturing into the wild, showing how quickly a peaceful retreat could descend into a fight for survival.